Welcome back to BIZ First in Focus. Doctor, before we went into the break, you told me that you pitched Sri Lanka by the end of 2012, the economic growth to be at 6.5%. I want to know, Doctor, how important is policy consistency, policy transparency for a country like Sri Lanka in the subcontinent to move forward?
Of course, this is a critical issue. It's not only Sri Lanka is opening up to the global economy. There are several countries, there are several competitors, even several post-conflict kind of countries like Nepal. Myanmar is making rapid strides in opening up its economy and reforming its political democratic institutions as well. So there are countries, several countries opening, so we had to compete with them. One of the critical things in Sri Lanka, despite 3 years of another war, we do not have a clear policy framework for attracting FDIs. We are giving different signals. For example, look at the legislation to nationalize so-called underperforming enterprises, underutilized capacity, etc., etc. That's a very dubious kind of legislation, gives very wrong signal to potential investors. One of the first institutions to be affected by that legislation was Hilton Hotel. That's a FDI. So even some of the legislations which has come out recently are not necessarily conducive. In fact, counterproductive for attracting foreign direct investment. Yes, we have been attracting a bit of money into portfolio investment in the stock market, at least until last year, late last year.
We'll talk about the stock market in a moment. I remember a comment made by Minister of Economic Development, Dr. Minister Basil Rajapaksa, recently in one of the functions, and he said the government views the private sector as the engine of growth. Doctor, taking into account what you just said now, do you think the government is really serious about private investments in the country?
You are right to ask this question, because I seriously doubt that they are serious about it. I mean, there are a lot of things government says and does not follow through in political matters, in issues of governance and issues of economy as well. We have on and off heard this kind of private sector being the engine of growth, but look at the hard data. There is a subcomponent in the gross domestic product called government services, which includes public administration, other government services, and defense, which was 5.2% in early 2000s, 2003, 2005. Out of the national economy, only 5.2% was accounted for by these government services. It's just basically public administration, defense, and other government services, which has shot up to almost 10% in year 2010. So you can see that the hard numbers to show that despite the fact that government is saying that private sector is the engine of growth, but there is a clear direction of state-led, state-dominated, state-driven economic development. Even the infrastructure development, massive amount of infrastructure development, road building, bridge building, airports, harbour and everything is taking place, but almost entirely is government, of course, with some foreign funding.
In the government's defense, Doctor, let me interrupt you for a second there. In the government's defense, the government has a vision of making Sri Lanka the miracle of Asia by 2016. And in the government's defense, they could say infrastructure development is the way forward.
Yes, yes. I'm not denying the importance of infrastructure. Sri Lanka has been lacking in infrastructure for long. But how do you finance and who really implements and undertakes the project is the issue. There are a lot of economic governance issues, corruption, kickbacks, etc. There are allegations, of course, that nothing is proven yet. But because it's largely government-driven, there are allegations. There's no open tendering procedures to award contracts to different contractors of building roads or airports. Or
so you mean to say, Doctor, the problem here lies on the corruption within the government itself in terms of tender procedures and so on and so forth. Am I right on that?
Yeah, it's not only corruption, but the process of undertaking infrastructure development, financing and the process of the undertaking.
What is the way forward, Doctor?
Okay, financing of infrastructure, the global practice is you invite private sector involvement, at least public-private sector partnerships, right? You can issue bonds to prospective private investors to invest. I think something is happening in the Columbus South port development. They're trying to issue infrastructure bonds, sell infrastructure bonds to get private sector investment for local into. These are the kind of things they could have done long ago. Sri Lankan government or the Sri Lankan people do not have enough sufficient financial resources to fund this huge amount of infrastructure. So we cannot afford. Public debt is already very high, so that financing part. Then implementation. How you choose a contractor. It's the same thing is happening in the former conflict affected region. There are a lot of complaints about how contracts are awarded, whether there are transparent and open processes, bidding processes, level playing field for private sector. This puts off a lot of private sector, even local private sector. Forget about the international private sector. Puts off a lot of local private sector from bidding for these projects, government projects, because they expect to pay some kickback to get awarded, despite they may have the merit, their proposal may have the merit. So there's a huge problem. I'm not denying that infrastructure is important, but how it is financed and how it is implemented is a critical issue.
In one of my earlier questions, Doctor, you spoke about the elections in the US. You spoke about the Eurozone crisis. I want to know, when the budget was being prepared, wasn't these issues taken into account by the fiscal policy makers of this island?
No, I don't think. To the best of my knowledge, the budget making process has got a lot of problems in this country, a lot of drawbacks. I have written extensively on it. The budget process is not transparent, is not open. To be honest, I don't think our Ministry of Finance has got adequate capacity to undertake a proper budgeting process, and the time taken to prepare the budget itself is very short by international standards, very inward looking, and there are serious issues. So therefore, whatever comes out of budget may not necessarily may not be reflected in the actual economy in the following year.
When you talk about the actual economy of this island, I want to drag your attention to the inflation rate in the island. The inflation rate is very low, and the economic growth of the island is drawing somewhat back. It was 8%, now it's 7.3%. However, the inflation rate in the island stands at a very low. Why is this not being reflected on the people's pockets, Doctor?
No, this is a serious issue. This is part of the core functions of the central bank, price stability. So one of the way they are manipulating or containing, so to speak, the inflation is through the exchange rate market. They have been deliberately propping up the rupee until at least early this year. In a sense, we had an overvalued rupee for two reasons. One, they use that as a policy instrument to contain inflation, to reduce the cost of imported goods for the people. Second is because they have borrowed a lot of money in the international private capital markets, so the repayments are due periodically, and if the rupee is low, they have to pay a higher amount of money in terms of rupees. That's one thing. Another thing, when you also asked me why is it not reflected in the people's pockets or people's lives, day-to-day lives. I mean, that's a very important question. This has got to do with how we work out the consumer price index in this country. Of course, a few years ago, I think 2007, the Colombo Consumer Price Index, which is the official rate of inflation used in Sri Lanka, was revised, updated from the earlier measure, which was so outdated from the 1952 old basket of goods. Anyhow, even this revision, after every household income and expenditure survey, this has to be continuously updated or revised to reflect the changing consumer pattern of the population and the basket of goods which are taken into account to compute the consumer price index. And also, more critically, is the weightage attached to each component of that consumer basket of goods, whether it's essential goods or education or rent or utilities, expenses, etc. So there are deficiencies in this kind of methodology, deliberately or otherwise. There is not much inclination to continuously update it, revise it to reflect the most current situation or consumption pattern of the consumers in this country. That way, the official statistics relatively shows offers mid single digit level inflation for the past couple of years, I think, perhaps more. But I do my marketing myself, and I'm sure you may also be doing. And day to day, we go to market, we see even main essential commodity prices, the sharp fluctuation of prices.
We're now going for another short commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about the Colombo Stock Exchange, the interest rates, and why has the Colombo stock market seen such a drastic decline over the years. All this and more after this short commercial break.